Hello, everyone. I'm Scott Davis, and welcome to Alternative Approaches to Affordable Housing Development. Today, we will hear from two well-recognized researchers in the field of affordable housing. Joining us are Kevin C. Gillen, PhD, Senior Research Fellow, Lindy Institute for Urban Innovation at Drexel University, and Stephanie Sena, Professor at Villanova University. Kevin?
Okay. All right, well, thank you very much, Scott, and good afternoon to everyone. So, of course, the topic of today's session is alternative approaches to affordable housing development. As we all know, affordable housing and housing affordability as a general issue has become a very topical one in recent years with a lot of the price appreciation we've seen in a lot of markets, not only in the Commonwealth, but of course around the country. And so that's what motivated us to look at some a possible alternative approach to affordable housing, particularly in Philadelphia. So the concern over affordability is a real one. So again, just trying to motivate this subject. We publish a house price index for Philadelphia, much like Case-Shiller, because they don't cover Philly. It's on Drexel's website. If you want to talk to me after this session, I can put you on our listserv if you want to receive the quarterly updates. But here's the house price index for Philadelphia. It has a starting value of 100 back in 1980. You can certainly see the price inflation of the 1980s. There's the recession of the early 90s. Here's the recovery of the mid-late 90s. There's the housing bubble years. Here's the Great Recession. From peak to trough, prices fell roughly about 22%. And then here's the current recovery. Since hitting bottom in 2012, house prices have risen 42% in Philadelphia over the course of just approximately 7 years. And they're now 13% higher than their previous peak in 2007. So housing is definitely rising. House prices are not only up, but of course we all know they've risen faster than incomes, and that creates an affordability problem. To put that in context, house price appreciation in Philadelphia has not only been phenomenal by our own historical standards, but has even outpaced those of our suburbs, which are generally quite wealthy. The house price indices cover all the suburban collar counties around Philadelphia. Here I'm just showing the Pennsylvania counties of Bucks, Chester, Delaware, and Montgomery. The red line in that chart is the same house price index I showed you on the previous chart. Notice that for most of Philadelphia's history, the red line is below the blue lines. House price appreciation in Philly generally lagged that of its suburban counterparts for reasons which we well know. It's generally a lower income city. It's public services, particularly schools, and that have not shared the same level of service that the suburban districts have. But notice that during the current recovery, we started out near the bottom, yet Philadelphia house prices have increased at a faster rate than the suburbs. Now, who here, if I said, if you bought a random home in Philly and a random home in the suburbs back in 1980 or even 1990, the return on investment of the Philly home would exceed that of the suburbs? Anyone here take that bet? I wouldn't have even. But over the last 7 years, that's exactly what has happened. So the price appreciation in the city and the attendant issue of affordability is a very, very real one. So, however, what are we going to do about it? What are the policy solutions? While the issue has received no shortage of coverage in the city, most of the local policy solutions in Philadelphia that have been discussed have disproportionately focused on new construction as the source of affordable housing, as opposed to rehabbing or improving existing housing. Several pieces of legislation that have been offered are modifying our 10-year tax abatement, so that properties whose abatements expire, the increment in revenues will go towards the Housing Trust Fund, which of course will promote the production of more affordable housing. We had an inclusionary zoning bill that was considered about a year ago that would mandate that 10% of all new home building would be for affordable or workforce housing, low-mod income households. And we also considered a construction impact tax. So 1% of the budget of all new construction would go to the Housing Trust Fund, and again, that would be diverted to the production of affordable housing. But there's some obstacles to that approach by focusing on just new construction. For one thing, Philadelphia has a very high poverty rate. We all know this, right? Highest poverty rate of any large city in the U.S. 25% of the population lives at or below the poverty line. On top of that, what is also, I think, a little less well known is that Philadelphia also has very, very high construction costs, fourth highest in the U.S., okay? The ranking goes New York, San Francisco, Boston, and then we're tied in fourth place with Chicago. Well, think about what incomes and prices and rents are in New York, Boston, and San Francisco. We have the same cost of development as those guys, but we don't have nearly the incomes that we have to support that high cost. As I like to say, Philadelphia is a city with New York construction costs, but Baltimore rents and prices. And that gap is driven by the fact that we have such a high poverty rate. So in practice, what does that do? The result is that market rate construction in Philadelphia is overwhelmingly skewed towards the upper end of the market because that's only where the high incomes are to support our very high cost of development. There's basically two types of development that happen in Philadelphia. You've got market rate development towards the upper end of the income spectrum, right? New condos, new townhouses, generally going for upwards of $300,000, or you've got publicly subsidized construction at the lower end for low mod income households. Almost next to nothing in the middle. The gap between prices and rents and the cost of development is just too big. So that gap between our low incomes and our high costs really limits the overall flow of new construction. So, if the flow is relatively low and your focus is on affordable housing, there's just not really much of a flow there that you can, really try to divert or manage towards the production of affordable housing. If you don't believe me, just, I'll show you a few quick stats here. Even though we've experienced a building boom, probably the biggest building boom since World War II in Philadelphia, it's actually quite modest compared to other large U.S. cities. So here's a chart showing post-recession new housing construction by metropolitan area, post-2012, total new single-family housing units, okay? The average metropolitan area in the U.S. has added 145,000 new housing units. In Houston, they've added nearly 340,000. Dallas, a city smaller than us, they've added 315,000. New York City, 309,000. You can see Atlanta, also smaller than Philadelphia, 182,000. The Philadelphia metropolitan area has added about 80,000 new single-family housing units, below the national metropolitan average. Big number by Philadelphia's own historical standards, but not so great compared to what other metro areas have done, particularly when you consider that a lot of those metro areas are actually smaller than Philadelphia in terms of population. A similar story for multifamily apartment construction. This shows post-recession new apartment construction by metropolitan area. Philadelphia metro area has added about 18,000, almost 19,000 new apartment units since the recession. Again, notice we're well below all the other cities. The 10 metropolitan area average is about 47,000 new apartment units. So again, Philadelphia's building boom, significant by its own historical standards, but really, again, quite modest when you compare to other cities. So again, if you're focusing on the flow of new construction is where you're going to get your affordable housing, as the saying goes, there's just not much there, right? So the policy implications of focusing on new construction is, first of all, most new construction, almost all of it really, is unaffordable to most households, especially low-income ones. And the amount of new construction in Philadelphia is relatively low for a city of our size, especially compared to the size of Philadelphia's low-income population. So, here's where the motivation for our research idea came from. If you can't obtain much affordable housing from the flow of market rate new construction, well, how about fixing up or rehabbing your existing stock of housing using public funds or financing? Because like I said, market rate new construction won't support low-income housing. I remember actually being in a briefing session when, with some council members, we were discussing the construction impact tax and, the inclusionary zoning bill. And, with our high cost of development, even if we all like, mixed income housing, it's a great goal, but it just strikes me as no matter where you may lie on the political spectrum of that, it strikes me as an extraordinary misallocation of funds to look at inclusionary zoning in the context of a city like Philadelphia, because for what it costs to build, a single $1 million new condo unit, which is what the market provides, you could rehab, 20, 30 row homes and help 20 or 30 families rather than just one low-income family, right? So we decided to look to see if that is actually true and if there's any there. So here's the empirical approach we took. We gathered data on multiple PHFA finance projects in West Philadelphia. The projects span the years 2007 to 2018. Total of 3,561 PHFA financed units. For each unit, each project, we know the following things. We know the developer's name and their location, location of the project, of course, the year it was built. We know the construction budget. We know the number of units in the project, and then the type of the project, whether it's single site versus scattered site, new construction versus rehabilitation, multifamily versus single family, so forth and so on. So we coded each project as generally either being a scattered site rehab, which is what most of the scattered site and rehabs were, they went together, or single site new construction, which is typically multifamily construction at a single site of more than one unit. So here's a map showing the PHFA projects in West Philadelphia from 2007 to 2018. The purple dots are the scattered site rehabs. Typically, it's just a standalone row home that was rehabbed. There might be one or two others on the block they did at the same time. And then the green dots are single-site new construction, disproportionately multifamily properties on a single lot that is detached from the surrounding properties. So this is greater sort of west, This is sort of greater West forgive me. This area over here is Mantua. This is near University City. Drexel and Penn are right in this area. And then this is traditionally row home workforce housing that's out in this neighborhood right here, just to sort of give you the lay of the land. So let me give you a few examples of these projects, comparing the scattered site rehabs to the single site new construction. We'll start with the PHFA finding of the single site new construction. So here's 4 projects. 40001 Conshohocken Avenue in the upper left, 1717 North 54th, the upper right, 331 Wallace, lower left, and 6100 Eastwick Avenue on the lower right. You notice that they are all basically multifamily, new construction. Even those that look like, single-family townhomes are part of a larger, multi-unit project that were developed on their own site. They typically have parking. There's some green space. There had to be some landscaping involved, things like that. But they're basically traditional multifamily type projects. But if we look at the rehab projects, and here I've got before and after pictures, you see that they're typically a standalone single-family house in the city. We've got some before and after pictures here. So in the upper part, we've got 3919 Mellon Avenue in West Philadelphia. You see the before picture. The property was abandoned and sealed. And then you see the after picture on the right. The bricks are repointed, new doors, new windows. I'm sure any gaps in the envelope were sealed, things like that. And then the bottom is another one for another typical row home, which is standard for the West Philadelphia housing stock. 149 North 57th Street, again abandoned. The bottom is sealed. The top is open to the elements. Then you see after, it really looks quite nice. They actually added, it looks like a new base masonry facing on the porch there. It has a nice little architectural detail to it. And again, you can see it's got pointing of the bricks, new windows, new doors, and I'm sure, again, it was sealed as well. 2 other ones. 241 South Alden Avenue, which was an end unit on a block in West Philadelphia. You see the before and after picture. These developers, by the way, one of the tricks of before and after pictures, you always do your before picture on a really lousy, dreary-looking winter day, and the after picture on a really sunny, beautiful summer day with the leaves in bloom and the sky being blue. You can see it's really quite a transformation. I mean, they put a stucco siding on the building, and obviously improved the weatherization of it. And then there's even a unique example, a historic single-family detached home on the bottom half. This was a PHFA finance project. Standalone 3-story home. I mean, the previous owners, look what they did. They put stucco on it, and they put vinyl siding on the upper level, and then the developers came along and removed that and, repointed the beautiful stonework and then the beautiful inlaid brickwork on the top half. So, again, really quite a dramatic difference in before and after. So these were the projects that were done, okay? So let's look at the economics of those projects and what the costs were. So, we delved quite deep into the data, but originally we were told we only had 15 minutes for this, so I could have presented more data, but I have a shorter presentation otherwise, but I'm sure you won't mind if I don't overload you with numbers, right? So here's the main findings. Let's compare the construction costs of the different types of project. So the average cost of a scattered site rehab unit, which are these, in West Philadelphia during this period, was $218,645. And I assume that's just the hard costs and soft costs, not the land costs, okay? The average cost of constructing a typical market rate Philadelphia residential unit, which I'm defining as a 1,280 square foot, 2-story attached row home with modest finishes, which is the typical home in West Philadelphia, is about a little over $270,000. If you build just replacement cost of a typical home in West Philly. The average cost of the multifamily PHFA finance new construction single site units was nearly $291,000. So they're ranked from least expensive to most expensive. Okay, so the rehabs came in at $219,000, well below the cost of a typical what a market rate cost would be to just build a typical row home, and then the PHFA finance units came in at $291,000 a unit. Okay, so you can see there's a significant difference between those numbers. So first, the first question would be, well, why are the scattered site rehabs cheaper? Well, we interviewed some of the developers in this, and these are basically what we found. First of all is the big one, and I'm sure anyone here who does development knows, mid-rise or high-rise multifamily, high-density construction is always going to be more expensive, right? Because it's always more expensive to build up than it is to build out, right? If you're going to build 10 units, 20 units, whatever, it's going to be more expensive to stack them on top of one another than just build, 20 attached units going out. It's a greater density, so that requires more expensive materials. You have steel framing, you have to put elevators in, you got to rent cranes to bring on site, et cetera, et cetera. That's one of the biggest reasons the mid-rise multifamilies are more expensive per unit to build. Also, the single-family rehabs don't require the site work. So they already have driveways or they have on-street parking. You don't need any extensive landscape. You don't have to put up security fencing, things like that. Moreover, the existing housing stock already has the utility hookups. They might not be being used at the moment, they just need to be reactivated. But you don't have to go through the whole rigmarole of working with the utility companies in the city to get extension of the existing infrastructure for your gas and your electricity and water and the like. Fourth, the single-family rehabs don't require the construction of common areas. You don't have to build lobbies, corridors, storage, laundry rooms, elevators. You can't charge rent or prices for those. People don't pay for common areas, so that's just a cost that the developer has to eat. So that results in some additional cost savings. Again, rehabs also typically have an existing frame and shell to work with. Even if it's a total gut job, you still have the envelope, so you don't have to rebuild that. Then lastly, a big one in the city is that single-family row homes don't require the stormwater management systems, which in Philadelphia, believe me, is a big issue. That adds significantly to costs in Philadelphia, so you don't have to deal with that. So that's where your savings come from, basically, in doing the single-family rehabs. And by the way, I ignored the issue of prevailing wages or union versus non-union labor in this. That's a separate thing that worth discussing, but I think is outside the scope of this presentation. So that's why they're cheaper. So what are the policy implications of this? Well, we crunched the numbers based upon the construction budgets. And we found that for what it costs to provide one unit of just market rate, not PHFA finance, not affordable, market rate new housing, you could build 1.24 units of existing housing. You could rehab 1.24 units of existing housing, all right? So instead of building, for what it costs to build one new home at market rate prices, you could build 1.24, you could rehab 1.24 homes. Or to put it in scalable numbers, for what it costs to build 100 new homes in Philadelphia, you could rehab 124 affordable existing homes, okay? For PHFA financed ones, which have an even bigger budget, it scales up even bigger. For what it costs to provide one unit of PHFA financed newly constructed housing, multifamily housing, you could rehab 1.34 units of existing housing. So again, for what it costs, at least in this context in West Philadelphia, for what it costs to build 100 units of PHFA financed multifamily housing, you could rehab 134 units of existing housing. So a gain of 34 units there, basically, for free in a sense, if you want to think of it like that. So how many units would that actually give you in practice? So say we did a do-over in West Philly. I took the construction budgets of all the PHFA financed units, and I'm going to instead rehab single-family units. Where would the gains be, and how much would they be? Well, on an annual basis, according to the most recent year data was available, according to the census, there were 3,239 new units of permitted new housing in Philadelphia. That was the gain in 2018, 3,239 new units, all right? Now, according to Philadelphia's Office of Property Assessment, we have to identify, of course, the candidates for rehab, right? So what's that housing stock look like? They classified 22,348 single-family houses in the city are currently classified as being in below average condition, sealed, or compromised conditions. I'm eliminating totally abandoned homes here that would typically be a tear down. And so there's a map showing the depreciated housing in Philadelphia, where it's located, and what its condition is. The yellow dots are homes that are in below average condition. Typically they're they're occupied, but they're just somewhat physically depreciated and dated. The black dots are the compromised homes, so these would be the ones that would need the most severe work. They would be a gut job. And then the red dots are the sealed homes. So they're standing, they still have their interiors, but obviously they're sealed up with plywood and the like. So those are the ones that we would be targeting if we could divert that construction budget to rehab our existing housing stock. So how many units would that give us? So again, remember the typical cost of building a new row home in Philadelphia is $271,779. Philadelphia added 3,239 new single-family homes last year. So if we multiply those two numbers, that gives us the total construction budget in 2018 for new homes in Philadelphia, $880 million. So that's what we have to work with. So applying that $880 million to the 1.34 multiplier, we could rehab 4,026 affordable units rather than building 3,239 new units. That's a gain of 787 additional units for the same cost. Let me repeat that. A gain of 787 additional units under the rehab model as opposed to the new construction model. OPA says there's about 23,000 substandard homes in the city. If you convert 4,026 of them to basically a rehab new unit, that's an 18% reduction in Philadelphia's stock of substandard housing. An 18% reduction in Philadelphia's stock of substandard housing. And that's just for 1 year. So obviously over multiple years, those gains become quite significant. So where do we go from here? So what the summary is, the numbers, I think, this is basic summary statistics here. It's nothing complicated. So they strongly suggest that the economics of rehabbing existing housing, in Philadelphia at least, rather than building new housing, can produce more affordable units. I think this argument is especially compelling in the context of Philadelphia because the city's construction costs are very high, and there's already a substantial stock of dated and depreciated housing. Would this model work in, say, a Sunbelt city where construction costs are low, and there really is no stock of older housing to rehab? I think that would be, the yield would not be as great there. But certainly that's not the case for Philadelphia, and I think a lot of other cities around the Commonwealth and in former Rust Belt cities. Where do we go from here? Some additional research before we finalize this paper and make it public. We want to look at the fiscal implications of this. Obviously, more housing, means more tax revenue for public services. But in particular, I'm wondering if single-family housing also has a bigger spillover effect on a block rather than multifamily housing, which is typically, on its own site and can often take up a block on its own. So if you rehab an existing home, that can spur development in other nearby homes or raise their value since you've improved one home on the block. So the fiscal benefits of the rehab model might also exceed the fiscal benefits of just standalone multifamily single-site construction. So with that, I thank you very much, and I will now turn it over to Professor Sena for her presentation.
May I ask a question before
Okay. Well, we were going to,
Prefer the end.
yeah, we were going to try to hold everything till the end if we could. Is that okay?
Right, it's just that I just wanted, while you were still on your subject, whether you're talking about rental houses in rehab or home ownership houses.
We did not examine tenure on this, but I know that the homes are a mix of both.
And I just want to say before you move on that being a housing developer and working with property management companies, the cost to maintain scattered site rental rehabs is unfeasible in many cases.
Mhm.
And so that's why, one reason that this model hasn't been done before, because it's really hard to manage.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay. And actually, the other file first,
Oh, there's another one?
and it's open.
Homeless shelter?
Yes. Yeah, was there a way to rewind it and turn up the volume? Is there volume on the, do you want me to come here?
Here's the volume.
Is there volume on the? Oh,
You want to put this in?
is our IT guy here? Oh, wait.
Yeah.
What
the
is
volume's
it?
maxed on this and it's maxed on this.
Our IT guy was the second. I know. It's okay.
Why don't you mic the speaker?
Where's the speaker? Right in here?
Sure.
Of people experiencing homelessness in the U.S. have pets.
No, that's all right. I don't know where the volume is on this. It's okay. All right, and then I can play this at the end. We can just go to the PowerPoint.
Play it?
Yeah, we'll just go to the PowerPoint because I can't figure out how to get the volume on it.
Okay.
Thank you. It's the second. Yeah, right there. Perfect. Okay, and let me get the advancer. We can start with that first slide. Okay. Hey, everybody. Oh, yeah, I can't, do you know how to put the sound on? I have a video file.
If the video isn't inherent in the PowerPoint on the laptop, it's not going to work for you.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
No problem. Okay. Are you ready to go for a ride? It's going to be a little bit of a ride. Okay. Just so you know, here's my contact information. You will probably have questions afterwards. We're going to take 15 minutes for questions at the end, but if you think of questions after the day is over, you can always email me at stephanie.sena@villanova.edu, and you can even text me. Don't call. I won't answer. 484-437-3042. Okay, here we go. So scope of homelessness. Throughout the nation, we're looking at about 550,000 people nationwide who are experiencing homelessness on any given night. Nearly a quarter of them are under the age of 18 years old, 10% between the ages of 18 and 24, 67% are 25 years and older. In Philadelphia, and that's where I'm based, but show of hands, how many of you are from Philadelphia? Okay, so that looks like about 1/3 of you. There are about 5,500 individuals who are experiencing homelessness in Philadelphia. Those are individuals who are counted. You might know this already, but that the way the city and most cities throughout the country count homelessness is by what's called the homeless census. 4 times a year, people go out on the streets and count people who are in abandoned cars, buildings. We are trained to find them in trees and in hiding spaces, mostly because the police come and do sweeps throughout the night. So if somebody wants to sleep through the night and not be bothered by the police, they often have to hide. So we're taught where to find people who are hiding. But this number, it's actually probably significantly higher than that. And there's about 12,000 people in the city of Philadelphia who try to access shelter every year. Many of them are turned away for various reasons. A lot of shelters are very high barrier, meaning that people can't come in for a variety of reasons. Most of the city shelters are actually not ADA accessible. We've seen this up close. There are no shelters that let people come in with their pets, and we actually have about 25% of all people who are homeless have pets with them. But if somebody who has a pet wants to put their pet in a pet shelter, most of those pets are euthanized because the pet shelters are at full capacity. So what's happening in Philadelphia and throughout the country is homelessness is on the rise. Mostly, as Professor Gillen was mentioning, we have an increase of housing costs in Philadelphia. Between 2015 and 2017, there was a period of time in which the housing costs spiked by 44%. So housing costs are going up, wages are stagnant, and so what's happening is that more and more people can't afford their rent or their mortgages. They are behind on a few payments. They become evicted. Once they have an eviction, it's almost impossible for them to get housing again. So I see this up close every day. And a lot of those people were housed with a pet. They become homeless with a pet. And in order for them to seek shelter, they have to give their pet up, knowing their pet will be killed. So this is a crisis we're facing in Philadelphia and throughout the country. There's many other reasons people are turned away from housing, but shelter rather, two I see all the time though, mostly if there's no access for people with disabilities or wheelchair accessible access, that's a problem in Philadelphia. And also couples are often separated, and if families are too big, there are no shelters to serve them together. The city estimates that there are 650 people living on the street at any given time in Philadelphia. There's a variety of causes of homelessness, including low wages, lack of affordable housing, inadequate housing assistance. Most of the housing vouchers have dried up, and there's sometimes a 10-year waiting list for housing vouchers. The people who get the housing vouchers are often considered to be most vulnerable. These are people who have been homeless for an extended period of time, also people in families. In addition to that, people who have a history of drug abuse or who have significant mental illness. So if you don't fit into any of those categories, it's significantly higher to get a voucher. So in the shelter system, a lot of the people who come into my shelter, and I'll explain my shelter in a minute, actually don't qualify. So they're trained by our case managers and social workers to fake mental illness. Just think about that for a second, because otherwise they cannot get a housing voucher. We also have mass incarceration and high rates of recidivism, especially affecting Black and brown men in the United States. Underfunded schools, lack of affordable health care, lack of affordable transportation, lack of a support system, domestic violence, inadequate support for mental health and substance abuse challenges, and opioid addiction. These are some, and oftentimes some of these things are concurrent. We have people who are in the shelter who are experiencing multiple things at once often. So a little bit about me. I have been teaching at Villanova since 2003. I know that is hard to imagine because I'm only 23 years old. But I've been teaching there since 2003. I'm a history professor, and I currently teach in a department at Villanova called the Center for Peace and Justice. It's an interdisciplinary department with professors from all different disciplines and backgrounds, but whatever we're teaching, whether it's English or sociology or history, the theme is peace and justice. And also, they're electives, so the only students who come to my class are students who want to know how can we have more peace and justice. I live in a little bit of a bubble of kindness, and all my colleagues and all my students are trying to create a more just world. So I really have a great life. Prior to being in the Center for Peace and Justice, I worked in the history department because I am a historian. I find that academics tend to take themselves entirely too seriously, and that's not me. So I much better fit in the Center for Peace and Justice. However, my Villanova students, they live in a little bubble. The majority of students at Villanova, so it's a Catholic private school in the mainline suburbs of Philly. The majority of them are coming from Catholic private suburban high schools. Many have never even gone to the city. And I try to teach about global poverty, which affects most people throughout the world. Most people in the world today are living on less than $2 a day. So I try to teach that at Villanova, and it's hard for that to resonate when they look outside and they see the landscaping that's like millions of dollars. And they go outside their classroom in Bartley, and they can follow the ticker tape, and they can watch what their stocks are doing. So there's a little disconnect. I like to teach outside of the classroom, and so what happened is that in 2011, I heard a report on NPR about a shelter run by Harvard and Cambridge students in Boston. And I went back to Villanova and I said, that sounds awesome, let's check that out. So I took 20 Villanova students to Boston over spring break, and we stayed in that shelter, hung out all week. At the end of the week, we went to a little coffee shop and said, you want to do this in Philly? And everyone's like, yeah. I think they were like, just really caffeinated, but they were very excited, and we came back to Philadelphia and got to work. When we opened our doors, which was only a few months later, I worked really quickly. It was in the winter of 2011 when we opened, and the Ridge shelter was closing in Philadelphia. So that was the biggest shelter. It had about 300 beds. It was closing due to budget cuts, and there were no new beds coming open. So I knew that more people were going to be dying on the streets of Philadelphia, and I said, we can't allow that. Budget cuts because there was a shift in funding around this time away from shelter and what's called like a continuum of care and towards housing. Like housing subsidies. But again, the housing subsidies can't keep up with the high cost of housing, which is why the vouchers are drying up, and we're seeing this like 10-year wait list for a voucher. So it's not tenable. Also, this new solution, which was housing, and I get why housing and not shelter would be the solution to homelessness. The problem is that the gateway for getting a voucher is the shelter. So what's happening is that there were people living in substandard housing in Philadelphia or doubled up in a violation of like zoning variances. There were multi-families living in one unit. And they're promised a voucher, but they can only access the voucher if they go into a shelter. So more people start leaving their substandard housing, going into the shelter, then the shelters are underfunded, and the money is taken away from the shelters. It's a hot mess. So, so anyway, so in the middle of the vouchers, the funding drying up, I said, like, I'm gonna buck the trend, let's open a homeless shelter and run it by college, with college students. So it was first my Villanova students, but then all the local universities heard about it. We got a lot of great press, and they all wanted on board. So this is like from a newspaper clipping from the Swarthmore magazine. A Helping Hand, Swarthmore joined 6 other Philadelphia area colleges in the creation of a student-run homeless shelter. So it was Swarthmore, then Drexel, Penn, Temple, PCOM. Now we're at all the major universities, and we also have partnerships with all the local elementary schools and high schools in the Philadelphia region. So basically what happens is our shelter's different than most because most shelters are transient and drop-in. We keep the same clients with us all year, and we link them to services and help them get into housing. So this is not a Band-Aid. It's actually meant to get people back on their feet. And then all the chapters and all the college students, they come too. I say the most important thing is not to serve the food or clean up afterwards. It's to sit and break bread with our brothers and sisters who are experiencing homelessness. So what it would look like is a huge table with everybody, a 4-year-old and a 12-year-old and a 50-year-old and a 70-year-old all sitting around and like playing pinochle and chess and having engaging conversation. And then, so again, inspired by the Harvard homeless shelter, traveled to Boston. We were in church basements since 2011. Before I opened, I kind of made a list of all the like problems I might encounter. So this is pre-2000, right when we're opening the first shelter. And I thought, what happens if somebody comes in with an addiction? What happens if there's violence? And I'm creating all this list of concerns so I can preactively solve them. It turns out that our clients are amazing, have never created 1 ounce of stress for me. The church people, oh my God. That's a book. I'm not going to go into it, but you're going to read between the lines. Okay. Anyway, we were in church basements. The churches wouldn't allow us to take in pets. We had to turn away people who had pets all the time. I'd try to find resources for them, realize there were no resources available at all. And it broke my heart because what we see in Philadelphia is people dying on the streets with their pets. So the power of failure. I'm a huge fan of failing, which is good because I try to do it every day. So we got a ton of press on our project, and we had a bunch of investors, including, if you're from Philly, one of our biggest and first investors is Alan Dom. He's city council at large in Philadelphia, and he was like one of our first financial investors. And we had a building under contract. So for a long time, we were looking at existing buildings, and what we need is a community, so not like one house to rehab, but an area where several people can be, many people, and a community center where we can have shared meals and services. So we were looking at churches, schools, warehouses to rehab. It was mostly cost prohibitive to be able to rehab these big buildings. But then we did find a location. We had it under contract. Alan was buying it for us. And it was a doctor's office with 100 rooms that were going to be turned into rooms for people and their pets. We're low barrier, so we accept people with their pets, their partners, and their property, which usually most shelters don't allow. So we had it under contract. We were 60 days from opening, and we were hit with NIMBYism, which I'm sure you all know about. So I get a variety of different type of NIMBY pushback. At Villanova, like they would never allow a shelter in their neighborhood. That would be NIMBYism, but it would be from a lot of like wealthy white people who don't want poor people to come into their neighborhood and give them poor cooties. But in this neighborhood, we were with the building under contract. It was actually predominantly black and also predominantly poor, and I still had significant pushback. And it was mostly not because really of who I was serving, but because of who I am. So because I'm white and I'm a professor at Villanova, I was seen as an outsider. And there was definitely this like, who do you think you are to come in here and do this? What's interesting is that while I'm a Villanova professor, I'm actually a low-wage adjunct and living in poverty in Philadelphia, and actually the neighborhood is in my backyard. They just happen not to know that and make some assumptions about me. But anyway, there was significant pushback. And Alan, who, again, City Council at large, pulled out. We had a lot of the financial investors pull out because they were concerned about the pushback politically and otherwise from a neighborhood that didn't want us. And the contract fell apart. And then I cried for a week in bed. And then I ate a lot of chocolate. And then some wine. And then a lot of wine. Stop judging me. So this is... and then we have the birth of where we are now. So one of my partners on the project, her name is Lucy Noland, and if you're in Philadelphia, you might have heard of her. She's the lead anchor on Fox 29. And no one would get me out of bed. I was like crying for a week, and she kept calling, saying like, "We're meant for something bigger. Don't worry. It's gonna be fine." And so I heard a viral report about tiny homes in villages of tiny homes in Eugene, Oregon for people who were homeless and their pets. And I always liked the idea of tiny homes. And I said, that sounds so cool, I'm gonna go check it out. So I went to Eugene, Oregon, fell in love with these massive villages for people who are homeless with their pets, took all of their manuals, stole all their best practices, and then started going on a tour of these villages of tiny homes for people who are homeless throughout the world. And they're propping up in various places like Edinburgh, Scotland, where I had to go check out in October, and I have to go out again next week. Just going and learning best practices from these places throughout the world where they're making this work and where it's been really successful in being able to move people out of homelessness. Our project has 3 tiers to it. So tier 1 and this is actually a picture I took of the village in Edinburgh, Scotland. So tier 1, we're calling the Breaking Bread Village. And in the Breaking Bread Village, we have these villages of micro homes or tiny houses for people who are homeless and their pets. Each village has about 15 homes and a community center. In each home, we can have about 2 to 4 people living in them, and people can come in with their families and their pets. And these houses, when people think tiny homes, they often think like sheds. They're not sheds, they're real homes, just smaller and very eco-friendly. We're using like passive houses, so thinking a lot about energy efficiency, solar panels, biodegradable everything. It is though connected to the electrical grid, and it does have running water. And we're looking at, there's not actually a concrete definition for what a tiny house is, but we are looking at kind of on the larger spectrum of the tiny house. So what we're looking at is somewhere around 600 square feet, which is approximately half of what the average unit constructed in Philadelphia is. The cost, though, is significantly less. So the first house, we're actually breaking ground in the middle of next month. It's going to be a huge groundbreaking and a party for the entire neighborhood. And if you're in Philly, totally come and check it out. So, but there's all of these, so the cost is, the cost decreases as we go up in scale. And we're doing this throughout the whole city of Philadelphia. We're working with the Office of City Planning and Ann Fedulin, who's also providing us with shallow rent subsidy. I'm going to get to that in a second. So what happens is that on the villages, we take people who are homeless. There's an intake process. We do criminal background checks on our clients, but also on our volunteers. And no one, whether client or volunteer, can come in if they have a violent record, but other records, such as a drug record, which is very common. You can volunteer with us, you can stay and live with us, but not if you have like child abuse or violent background. So there's these houses, and then in the middle there's a building with shared meals and services. The services are important because in Philadelphia, like most cities, if somebody's homeless, they need to access a variety of services, and they have to go all throughout the city to attain them. So they go one place if they need health care, mental health care, job training, financial literacy, resume building, whatever it is, and usually they don't have transportation. Sometimes they're people who are mobily challenged and can't get to all these places. So our services are centrally located on the community. Most of the services are offered by the local universities because we have partnerships with all the local universities. So Villanova is offering us their Department of Career Services, where they offer all their career services for students. They offer it to our clients. We get all kinds of physical rehab and mental health care, all from the local universities, which is fabulous to be tapped into that network. So once people stay with us, every time they come in, we give them a discharge plan, meaning how do we get you out? And they stay with us approximately a year, and then when they graduate, they go on to the next tier, which is graduation station. In that tier, there's micro homes, both for shallow rent subsidy, and the subsidy coming to us from the government, also for low-income housing. And we're looking to partner with banks for mortgages, for our low-income housing, and then also for financial literacy courses. And so we are in talks with banks, and they're kind of competing for who gets to partner with us. So that's exciting when they're competing to see like which one will we take. So the tier 3 is rehabbing of existing buildings with our community partners. So we're partnering with Habitat for Humanity, Penn School of Architecture and Design, because there are about 6 vacant homes for every 1 person who is homeless. So it's a combination of new construction and rehabbing existing houses, because most of the houses in Philadelphia that are vacant are not livable. So with our partners, we're rehabbing them to make them livable for people who are graduating from our villages. So this is a coalition. It's a movement. We have a board of directors, which meets regularly. We have a board of advisors that oversees the board of directors. We're connected to all the local universities and the public schools, and we get a lot of services and also meals donated from that venue. There's an education component, so I am a professor and I teach courses on poverty and homelessness, but I also, before I went on for graduate school, I was getting my education degree, so I've also developed lesson plans for K through 12 to marry standard curriculum standards with issues of poverty and homelessness. So kindergartners, I come in and we do things like sort socks, because in kindergarten they're learning about patterns. And so I come in, we sort socks, and then we donate it to shelters, and I teach them about why people who are homeless need socks so badly. So I create these lesson plans, and I either go into the schools and teach, or I give the lesson plans to the teachers to teach, so that there's a component in the school system teaching them young. At this point, so many schools in Philadelphia know me, and the kids come running up to me all the time. Again, I live in the city, and I'm like, they know, they're like, hey, that's the girl from my homeless shelter. And they come and run over and give me a hug, and they'll tell me about the interaction they had with somebody homeless the other day, and it's pretty incredible. Often I'll be like walking around, I'll see like lemonade stands, and people are raising money for my shelter, and they don't know who I am, which is so cool. And they'll say like, we're raising money for a homeless shelter, and they'll tell me all about it, and I'll sit there like, go on. It's great. So we have architects and engineers on our project. We're working with partners in the healthcare field, the animal rescue field. So I, as I said, was running a shelter for years, yelling from our rooftops. Our neighbors are dying on the streets. Money trickled in, but it was slow. And then 2 years ago, I said, we're gonna let in pets. And all of a sudden, the money fell from the sky. And so it turns out people really like pets more than people. And so if I had known that, we would have had a puppy as a mascot from like day one, but I came in late to the game with that one. So it's the animal rescue community that is so resourced, and they're in many ways stronger than the people rescue community. But we're bringing them under the umbrella, and people say to me like, you know, I want to help you, not because of the people, but I really like dogs. We want to come and groom the dogs and pet the dogs and walk the dogs. This is going to be the best cared for dogs on the planet. But that's cool. They'll come in to groom Pabu, but they'll hang out with Heath, and they'll fall in love with Heath. And it's that encounter I'm looking forward to. We also are working with environmentalists, because the tiny houses is so eco-friendly, and there's a lot of people in the environmental world that want to work on these tiny houses, and I'm about getting out of your silos. All of these issues, climate change and homelessness and euthanasia of animals, all of these things are connected, right? So people who are poor are suffering the most from the effects of climate change, and I say, you're over here working on your environmental issues, you're over here working on this. Let's all work together under the same umbrella, because we're stronger like that. So we're building a huge coalition. We have lawyers. We have the best legal team in the entire world. So our legal team is Pepper Hamilton, and one of my lawyers is here. Can you raise your hand, Tim? That's one of my lawyers. So we have lawyers who are in the Philadelphia branch of Pepper Hamilton and in the Harrisburg branch, and Tim is in the Harrisburg branch, and they have provided us with over $69,000 worth of legal services pro bono. So thank you, Tim. We couldn't have done this without you. Thank you. It's a pretty incredible coalition. I'm really lucky to be a part of it. And we're working with policymakers, including a lot of city council who's on board. Our biggest city council partner is Mark Squilla. He actually is in my district, and that's the district where we're building our first village. People have asked me this question about zoning, and I want to explain to you real quickly that there's two types of zoning: legal zoning and political zoning. So my lawyers are real estate lawyers, and they know all the legalities about zoning. What I've learned is that nothing is legal. And you have to just get all the political power and the forces on your side and figure out how to make it work. And if it doesn't work, you get them to do what's called an overlay. So I figured that out really quickly. The first land we're getting is from the Philadelphia Land Bank. Yes. And that's are you with the Land Bank? Oh, awesome. Okay, well, it's a hot mess. But Yes, very few people are, but we cracked the code. And we worked with some incredible people at the land bank. The land bank gets some not great press because of some ways that it's operating, but I have to tell you, there's incredible people working at the land bank, and I'm so grateful to have worked with them and to be getting land through the land bank. I've seen how it works, and also what maybe we can do to work together to improve it. Funding is a variety of ways. We get funding from grants, from corporate sponsorships, from our university chapters, from private, and I'm almost done. I have like 1 second left. I probably. 2:30.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. From private donations, some prostitution. Seeing if you were still paying attention. So that's. No, really. So this is my partner, Lucy Noland, I was mentioning from Fox 29, and we're a little crazy, and so we get a lot of press on it. We were on the Preston and Steve show a whole bunch. I don't know if you know that, but if you're in Philly, you know the Preston and Steve show. This is us at the top. She does these Facebook Lives, and they go viral, and she comes over to my house often when I'm in my pajamas. I was wearing, in this case, cow pajamas, and then she does a Facebook Live video of it, and it goes viral throughout the country. So then I got her matching cow pajamas, and now we do our Facebook Live videos and matching. We don't take ourselves very seriously. So our shelter, we are really part of the village. This is how we push back against the push back against NIMBYism and get NIMBY to YIMBY, yes, in my backyard, is that we are really about cleaning up and beautifying the neighborhood. So we have programs. If you're in Philadelphia, you know Isaiah Zagar. And we work with Isaiah Zagar to do mosaics throughout the city and in our neighborhood so that our villages are gorgeous. And there's these gorgeous pieces of art that outlive us all. And we do them with our clients and our brothers and sisters who are homeless and our student chapters. This is one of the many ways. We also do like neighborhood cleanups with our clients and our volunteers. And I mentioned to you, our shelter is actually the only shelter that allows people to come in with children. When I have a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, I know crazy because I'm 23, but when they were babies, I wanted to volunteer at a shelter, and I called all the shelters, and no shelter would allow children. They said it was a liability. Our shelter is the only one that encourages children, and therefore all the families in Philadelphia who want that experience only come to my shelter. So our shelter is extremely family friendly. This is Jay. He's playing with Sam. Sam is in love with me. He's adorable, this little, I think he's like 10 years old. They're playing a game of checkers. Here is Jay playing hopscotch. Then, about a week after the picture in the middle that I took of him playing hopscotch, he had an emergency blood clot in his leg, and he needed his leg removed. And we helped him with rehab. We hooked him up to my amazing friends who helped him with physical rehab and getting him a prosthesis that fit. He and I were born on the same day in the same hospital, the same day, August 28, 1979, in Pennsylvania, University of Pennsylvania Hospital. And we both had amputations in our late 30s. I did as well. You just can't tell because I'm wearing shoes. And it was both because of like emergency life, it was for life-saving measures we needed these amputations. And our experiences were dramatically different, which has a lot to do with race and class and healthcare in this country. If you want to learn more about that, come to my TED Talk on Wednesday. I have a 50% off code, so totally see me if you're going to be in Philadelphia and want to go to the Philadelphia TED Talk. They have about 1,200 tickets they're selling for the Temple Performing Arts, but I'm going to talk all about healthcare and amputation and the massive problems and how it connects to homelessness. So this is on the left, a picture of John, who he was a September 11th first responder. He became deaf because of what he experienced there in the rubble of Ground Zero. And when he came into our shelter, he was completely deaf. And here's a picture of him teaching my daughter Sylvia sign language. And all of my students would come, and he would be their teacher and teach all of the kids who came in sign language. It was really beautiful. And we also do haircuts and shaves. This is really about holistically how we care for people and love them. Jason, who was at our shelter for a really long time, I loved him desperately, degree in law from Yale. And then he went missing for a little while. I freaked out, and he showed up on Thanksgiving, not as someone homeless, but someone who came to volunteer. So after being a client for a long time, he's actually back on his feet. He's in housing, and now he comes and volunteers at our shelter, which we get a lot of. Other people, we've had families who we've had come with us through the shelter and we've helped house. This is Tyrone, who we helped with job acquisition and housing. Each one of these people has a story that's gorgeous and would break your heart. And really this is about the entire community is needed to make a difference in this area. It's really a movement. It's not, I don't know what to call it. It's not a homeless shelter. It's not affordable housing. It's a movement to care for our neighbors. That's what we really need because we're lacking that right now and it's killing us. It's not sustainable. So I'm sure you have a ton of questions. In the end, I'll answer some. You can also, again, email me or text, do not call. And I can tell you, but this is a trend that's popping up throughout the world. Again, I'm going on a tour throughout the world to visit and learn best practices and bring them back to Philadelphia, but I'm positive it's something that could work here in Harrisburg or in your own backyard. So thank you. I'm done.
All right, we have a little over 15 minutes for questions for both presenters, so go ahead, ask away. Yep.
Quick question, Stephanie, where is your shelter located in Philly, or one?
So the first village is in a section of Philadelphia called Harrogate, which is in what's called District 1, which is Mark Squilla's district, and that is also the district where I live, kind of not far from Port Richmond section of Philadelphia. And then we're looking at an additional 53 homes in another section of Philadelphia. That's something that I'm going to make public soon, but we can talk outside of this room of a lot of people about that. But we're looking to build them, and we're actually drawing up plans as we speak for having these villages in various places throughout the city.
For Stephanie, at the beginning of your presentation, you talked a little bit about the challenges for people with disabilities,
Yes,
wheelchair access,
that's
and
right.
compliance. For the tiny home model that you're pursuing, are some of those tiny homes going to be adaptable to be wheelchair accessible if needed?
Yes, so all of them will be. Yeah, sorry. All of them will be. That's crucial because that's a problem, and we saw it with Jay when and we were in church basements at that time, and he couldn't get down the stairs. Also, I'm often in a wheelchair because I've actually had 5 amputations in the last 2 years. So it's something that I'm thinking about all the time, and so there's not one single building that will not be accessible. Thank you.
More questions?
This one's for Dr. Gillen. So what's your perspectives on an inclusionary housing unit that would be perpetually affordable versus the rehab that may not have a sort of perpetual affordable restriction on it in terms of funding?
So if I understand your question correctly, you're concerned that the rehab affordable unit could eventually just become a market rate unit, whereas the inclusionary zoning mandates that. It's a good question, and I think a legitimate concern. The reason, like I said, the inclusionary zoning works best in high-cost, high-production areas. The vast majority of communities with inclusionary zoning laws or ordinances are concentrated in 3 states: California, Massachusetts, and New York. And by New York, it's downstate, in Long Island. The profit margin of development in those areas, because it is high cost, but it's high income, high price, high rents, is enough that the developer can eat, I'll take a loss on 1 unit out of 10 or 20 on that affordable. So inclusionary zoning works very well there. Like I said, in Philadelphia, the problem is that profit margin is so thin. Even though, as I like to point out, we're America's 5th largest city, but all of our developers are local. Okay, I actually have a map I show at other presentations. I hired a consulting firm to track all the publicly traded home builders and where they had projects in the region. And I have a map of the entire Philadelphia metro area, and there's all these pins in the suburbs, the Pultes, the Hortons, the Tolls, not in the city. So it just tells you that, our profit margins are narrow. So that's why the, inclusionary zoning, despite the attraction of that unit remaining affordable in perpetuity, we just don't have enough flow in the pipeline and enough margins to really support the inclusionary zoning model. So I think the concern is well-founded. What would be the policy solution to if you went with the rehab model? Well, maybe you could tie, public financing, or, if you're getting land from the land bank, then you have to have a covenant that it's, rented or sold at affordable rates, for 10 years, 20 years, something like that.
Anyone else?
With the federal low-income housing tax credit, your restriction is 30 years, or now even 35. So within that program, you already have that in place.
Good point.
She's already mapping her way home. Oh my God, that's so embarrassing for you. My phone number, 484, don't call me, 437, but totally text, 3042.
In the back here?
Can you please put up the first slide with your contact information?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Yes. I also have cards if you have a hard time reading it. I have cards with me.
Over here.
So I'm the state representative. So recently I'm from the Pittsburgh area, and I had some students from Carnegie Mellon University come see me to talk about food and housing insecurity for students, because we know that tuition is going up.
Yes.
Funds to subsidize college tuition is drying up, and when I was in college, I also experienced housing and food insecurity. So I was wondering, because you are so rooted in academia, if you are also addressing any needs of the actual students who are attending
Yes.
your school who are maybe experiencing homelessness.
That's a great question. Thank you for that. I'm actually very close with Sarah Goldrick-Robb, who you probably know. She's like the preeminent scholar on this issue of homelessness and housing insecurity and food insecurity amongst college students. She's a good friend of mine, and she's also giving a TED Talk on Wednesday with me. So totally come and you can hear us both. She's fabulous. And so, yes, so at Villanova University, it's one of the most expensive schools in the country. However, there is a population of people who are homeless. Some of them sleep in one of the dorms, and there's not a very systemic way of addressing this. So the way that they address it is they have a food pantry, but it's sparse. It's like there's nothing there. And they also have they encourage Villanova students to all do these internships, but the internships are unpaid, and you need dress clothes to be able to get the internship. And there's a closet for to borrow a dress clothes or get dress clothes for free, but it's almost always empty. So I hold Villanova accountable for that. I think this is a problem with all universities. I think that universities need to be more cost effective or free. And also, it's a problem for college professors. Many of them are homeless. So a majority of college professors are adjunct, and they get minimum wage and below minimum wage and no health care. And if you want to learn more about that, if you look up my name, you'll see that it's a story that's gone viral, that I do not have health care from Villanova, and my costs of health care have exceeded $100,000. And so Villanova is trying to do these GoFundMe campaigns. We cannot manage on GoFundMe campaigns. This is not a solution. So I think this is a major problem, and thank God we have Sarah Goldrick-Robb and others who are working to address it. For me, though, in teaching, I'm teaching about how, regardless of whether you're a college student or not, we need to address issues of affordability when it comes to education and healthcare and wages. Increase of wages. So these are all issues that are connected. But at Villanova, I hold us very responsible, because I say we cannot do piecemeal and just have this half-empty food pantry and a half-empty supply closet. We need actual systemic changes. Another problem is that the sports teams, especially the Villanova football team, these are students who, some of them have come to Villanova homeless. Patrick Williams was one of my students who was homeless, and there's a documentary about us on this, so it's okay. He has told me it's okay to use his name. But he came homeless to Villanova. He was recruited for the football team because the NCAA double rules. He could not get any funding from the university, and when the university closes and during winter break, the dining halls close, and he became homeless again. So I took him in to live with us. But this is not okay at Villanova, where they have a huge endowment and where they have so much wealth that there are students who don't have anything to eat. And I speak truth to power. So I was the keynote speaker at Villanova this year on Hunger and Homeless Awareness Week, and they wanted me to talk about poor black kids in Philadelphia. And I said, no, you gotta look at yourself. What are you doing in this school? You know, they wanted to feel good about, and they want to make this difference between us and them, and I won't allow it. So, but you know, Sarah is again someone who is really leading the charge with this issue.
Question for the professor. You had, maybe I missed this, you went through the phase 1 or tier 1 with the micro housing units and then the tier 2 and then the tier 3, stage 3. Are those all existing now? Are they in the works? I wasn't clear.
Yeah, so this is all in the works. So right now, the first villages are, if you go to the land right now, they're doing work on the land right as we speak. And we're going with builders who are out in Connecticut. They have prefabricated these panels. They ship them to Philadelphia, and we put them together like log cabins. So they're panelized. And all of our volunteers, we have build days. So, but we're also working with labor unions. But what's happening is that, and then so the other land where we're getting 53 houses, we're currently working with the engineers and the architects and the city council. So it's all in process. The first like groundbreaking is around June 16th, and it's, you know, we're going to be open within weeks of that. So it's all really new.
What's the cost per unit?
So for the first house, it's the most expensive house because we're doing one as a demo, and then we're doing the rest. So the first house is $75,000, which is significantly below market price for new construction. However, again, when we do more, the cost goes down significantly. So the village of 53, we're looking at about $20,000 per home per unit. So it's a huge savings cost. Massive over new construction. Also, we need to be thinking about smaller anyway. We only have so many planets, so we really need to be thinking about this and living small.
So in those houses, what's included? Are there kitchens and bathrooms?
Yes, yeah, we have all of that. It's just small, and furniture is being donated by local hotels. So we're getting a lot of our supplies donated, mostly due to the fact that this is such a huge movement and everybody kind of wants in because it's so new and it's so trendy. And so we've capitalized on that, and also the prostitution. But so we get all that stuff. We're very fortunate to have received so many supplies and donations. And again, being connected to all the local universities helps as well. It's something that we can do in various parts of the country. And I'm writing a book on it, actually. This is something that we're creating a model so that you can do this in other places.
You listed a number of causes of homelessness, and one thing that wasn't on there, but I think is important, is just kind of break down the family relationships, which would isolate that person to be out on their own instead of living with their, whatever their age, parents, or living with their spouse, separated, or whatever had happened. And could you speak to that and how that kind of plays into it?
Absolutely. So there's a Bethesda Project, which is a wonderful organization in Philadelphia that works with people who are experiencing homelessness. They have a motto that I hate. And it's called, it's something about, we are a family for those who have none. That's a myth. Most of the people who come in have families, and it's not really even about breakdown of the family unit. People who are low income if you're getting a subsidy or a voucher, you cannot have other people living with you. There's laws against it. So a lot of people at my shelter, they have family that they are close with, and they go visit them. They are legally not allowed to live with them. So that's something that disproportionately affects people who are low income and who are getting help and vouchers and housing assistance. So that's something that needs to change. It's zoning laws that have to change also. Our zoning laws are not compatible with families, units, and families staying together. We need to change the fire code. Luckily, the person who's in charge of zoning right now in Philadelphia it has some really good ideas. He wants to change the zoning rules to make it so that more families can live together, like multi-family dwellings, the way we used to have it in the world. until people were, passed these ridiculous zoning laws making it so that everybody can only have like a one-family house. So, and he also wants to change the fire codes to make it safer. In Philadelphia last year, we had a family die because what's happening in Philadelphia is that many families are living in these single units because they can't afford it otherwise, but they're doing it illegally, so it's underground. And then it's a problem because of the fire. It's not through the walls like the guy David, who's in charge of city planning, zoning wants to make the wire through the through the walls, as opposed to those like units that we have. So what happened is a family perished in a fire in Philadelphia recently because the house was sectioned out into units illegally, and they were in a unit that didn't have the fire alarm. So he wants to change it. But what's happening is, yes, I agree, break down a family unit. But it's not just that. It's also that it's becoming very difficult for families to live together for a variety of reasons, but a lot of it, I think, is poor people discrimination.
In the back, we have a
Who are you asking the question to? I'm sorry. Okay, one more time. So what two narratives are you mentioning?
So the tourism, say you live in the tourism
Yes.
area, how do you integrate that with housing affordability?
I think all these things do need to be integrated, and I actually think that it's the responsibility of the businesses to care about this issue. I think that there are so many hotel rooms that are vacant that can be used at a much more affordable cost as shelter. And in fact, my ex-husband's family owns hotels in the city of Philadelphia, and we frequently do use rooms that are vacant for people who are experiencing homelessness. And also just for extra supplies. But I think that that part of that, marrying the two, for me, it starts with education, because there's a lot of people don't understand homelessness, and mostly because 18% of all people who are homeless are the ones you see. The ones the public thinks of are the people who are chronically homeless. They use the most resources in the city. They're the ones who end up in the emergency room all the time, and they use most of the city's services. But it's the majority of the population of people who are homeless. Most people who are homeless we never see, right? They're hidden from public view. And I see them all. And I think that what happens is that I need people who have never met someone who's homeless to come into my shelter and fall in love with Tyrone and fall in love with, with Latasha, and hear their stories and learn from them so that we don't have this stigma. Because I think it is the responsibility of all of us, especially the tourism and hospitality industry, to be part of the solution. And it'll make it easier for them to be part of the solution if they're not thinking homeless people, but they're thinking about Jay, right? And so that's where I come in. That's why I have all these families at my shelter, and we have over 300 volunteers who come regularly, is that it starts there, from that interaction. And from there, then you shift the narrative. So that's why I'm a teacher first, and I think experiential learning is what we need to shift that narrative so that we can marry the hospitality industry with this solution of how do we fix and end homelessness.
Okay, well, we're about out of time. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and let's give a...
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Just a reminder, the PowerPoints will be available on the forum website for all presentations or all sessions within about 2 weeks. So if you need to review anything, just check back at the website. All right, thanks again, and have a good afternoon.